we've had some really dry temperatures, and we always want to make sure that we water and we water appropriately. And we know that out in the western sections of the US, there's real concern about drought and a lack of water, even refilling a lot of their reservoirs. So we thought it would be appropriate to talk about watering wisely. When we look at our plants, let's think about them in a three zone as far as watering. We have low water use zone, and these are the kinds of plants where all you really need to do is to make sure that they get sufficient water to get them established, to be able to have a good solid root system. And a lot of our native plants actually fit into that low water use zone. When we're talking about the modern water use zone, we're talking about plants where, again, we want to make sure that we water them appropriately during their establishment, again, with a good root establishment. And then we have a tendency to make sure that we water them at times of stress, and in particular, when there's a lack of rain. So, for example, we're thinking about trees and shrubs in particular, because they're a larger tree, a larger root system. They have more potential of absorbing and taking up water, but we do have to make sure that we water them from time to time if they're under stress, if they're not doing well, and especially if there is a lack of water. And then the third one, we talk about the high water use zone. And that's in particular, no matter what time frame it is, we know that they're a type of a plant where they need a lot of water. And so we have to pay attention to them and water them on a consistent, regular basis, especially as that is needed. So we want to think about what to water. So choose the plants that are in your environment, in your landscape, that thrive according to the type of soil, the type of light that the plant requires, and the amount of space that that plant requires. I know a lot of folks plant trees or shrubs and they forget about what their mature size is going to be, and then they get to be really close. And then we overpopulate areas with plants, and they are all in competition for that same water. Know which plants require consistent moisture, and those that like moisture where it doesn't have to be as much, more drier types of conditions. And when you go to purchase plants, you have a tendency or research ahead of time to see what type of requirements are needed. And then think about where you actually put that particular plant. Does it need to, is more of a drier soils, a shade area, windy is okay for that, poor drainage? We need to make sure that we understand what the needs are water-wise for those plants. When to water, and you've heard this and we'll say it over and over and over again consistently, is if at all possible, water in the morning. That allows the leaves of all of the plants to dry out and helps to reduce foliar diseases, because those diseases have a tendency with water splash being just moist on that. The fungus and the bacteria really like that, and that's part of the condition of that disease triangle of having the right plant, the right pathogen, and the right weather environment. And it may be dry and hot outside, but the plant is still getting a lot of wet and staying wet. Make sure that you know how much water is actually in the soil. No, we don't measure it, but you can do that by feeling. Is it dry? If it's definitely dry, you need to make sure you water. Last week, there was mention about using the screwdriver test. And that is, just taking a screwdriver and probing it down into the soil. If it goes in easily, you know that there's plenty of moisture there. If it's really hard to push that screwdriver in, chances are you're really going to need some water on those plants at that time. How and where to water. Usually watering at the base of a plant at the ground level is going to be most important to keep the water off of the leaves. Water at the tree line or the drip line of trees in particular. I like to take like a 5-gallon bucket with a hole in the bottom, and I fill it up and I put it around the tree, kind of going around the tree. I'll let the bucket empty, and I may go over onto the other side of a tree and let it go again, and then maybe another section, depending upon how much water I think that tree may need. Lay out hoses, soaker hoses, and any irrigation, usually doing that in the spring before all of the plants actually have grown to up and have a lot of their leaves. It can be harder to put that down and make sure that it's actually staying on the ground for water when it actually gets turned on, and then do turn it on to make sure that it's not splashing up anywhere. Water deeply and less often to promote deeper, healthier roots, because we really want that root system to go as deep as it can. Because if it's moist down further in the soil, those roots are going to go far that particular soil depth in order to get that moisture. And if we train our plants to grow shallow roots, if we forget to water, chances are if we go away for a weekend, a couple of days without watering, we don't think about it, we're busy with our life schedule, those plants have shallow roots, they can really dry out really fast. So we want to train them by doing it as a deeper water to help them go deeper into the soil. To conserve water, some folks are really interested in conserving and keeping rainwater, rain barrels, and there's examples of rain barrels out there on the internet. And if you're interested, we do have some information. We can try to help you with that as well. Try to think about plants that could be more drought tolerant and require less water in the landscape and in your garden areas, especially your flower areas. A lot of our native plants don't need as much water. Mulching, and if Katie were here, she would say mulching is her favorite thing to do. It helps to protect those roots, staying cooler by being protected with that layer of mulch from the sun, and it also helps to keep that moisture in that soil. The other thing is to think about what is the water holding capacity of that soil. If you've got a lot of clay in the soil, chances are you don't need to add some compost, but if it dries out really quickly, maybe adding some compost to that soil would be helpful as well. And so through our soil testing, you can actually see what the organic matter is in the soil, and that can help determine if you really need to add some compost or add some organic matter to help with that water holding capacity if it's needed. And again, we want to make sure that we put the right plant in the right place, select plants that will thrive in the existing soil type, light, and space requirements of what you've got in your own landscape and in your own lawn. Remember that cultivation practices really can help with watering. We don't think about it in that capacity. We just think it's dry, we need to water. But there are things that we can do, such as with the lawns, make sure you mow at the correct height. Make sure that you try to manage weeds in the garden as much as possible, because the weeds are in competition for the moisture in the soil for the plants that we really want to have growing there. And again, mulch helps with those weeds. Maintenance of irrigation system. So if you do have an irrigation system in general, I don't know how many times that I've seen an irrigation system going and it's raining outside. So being able to adjust and adapt using sensors on irrigation systems can be really helpful. Again, watering in the morning, watering deeply. Make sure that there's enough airflow through the plants. That will also help with trying to prevent some of those diseases from occurring if you do have to water outside that morning time frame. So water when you're able to water. If you're not able to water in the morning, but please try to see if you can't water directly straight onto the ground instead of overhead. And remember, only water when a plant needs it. And those are just some tips to think about. And hopefully some of you are already doing a bunch of these. And if not, maybe you can implement some of them.